And today in TLC Live, award-winning entrepreneur, tech innovator, cultural intelligence expert, and TV commentator Lili Valletta will join us. Also, Jerry Patterson, a former state senator, former Texas land commissioner, and retired Marine Vietnam veteran. And last but not least, Judge Christopher Morales, County Court at Law Number 1 for Bend County, Texas, who is currently seeking for re-election, will be with us in TLC Live.
My goodness, you have been busy.
Oh my God. Welcome to TLC Live and welcome back to Orlando Sanchez. Thank God, Houston, today it's like spring.
Because I'm here.
Of course.
Good. I have sprung upon you. Anyway, welcome everybody. It's great to be back in the studio with my co-host, the lovely Andrea Gomez.
We miss you.
Well, we missed you too, but I enjoyed beautiful weather.
No, I know. You were running away from this beautiful weather in Houston.
Heat and humidity. But anyway, it's good to be back. And I think we do, as Andrea said, have a very busy show. So let's jump into it. As you know, the nation is just now waking up to what's happening in not only the state of Texas, but also a harbinger of what's going to happen, I think, in similar states like Texas. So we have New Mexico, we have Arizona, we have Las Vegas, potentially Colorado, but even into areas like Pennsylvania and other states, there is a shift, and the shift is cataclysmic. And what I mean is, you know what cataclysmic is?
No.
Big.
Oh.
Big.
Okay.
So there's a big shift in the political process in this country. We call it the Great Realignment. There have been tremendous realignments in the political process in this country with respect to how immigrants in this country have voted. It's happened with the Irish, it's happened with the Italians, and it just depends on where they are in their length of residency in this country. So as people reside in the United States longer, as they become upwardly mobile, become better educated, they become more conservative. That's happening with the Latino community in the state of Texas. And we know that because TLC has just concluded a massive poll of 1,200 registered voters in the state of Texas in certain regions where the potential for growth is at its highest. And some of the information that we found on this poll is absolutely fascinating. And so we're going to dive into that in just a little bit. Of course, we've got Jerry Patterson, who's a dear friend of mine, but you failed to mention he was a pilot. Well, not actually a pilot. I think he was a weapons systems officer in the backseat of an F-4 jet in Vietnam. I always contend the Marines shouldn't be flying taxpayer aircraft, but nonetheless, Jerry has served the country and the state of Texas, and frankly, wrote the legislation to allow Texans to carry concealed weapons in this state. So he is quite an innovator, but now he's become, in my opinion, one of the great Texas historians, but not only a historian on Texas, but on the contribution of Hispanics and Tejanos and Mexican Americans in Texas. And as you know, that's very important for us because we undertook that task in the last legislative session. We'll talk to Jerry about that. And then, of course, we have our dear friend, Judge Morales from down in Fort Bend County. So why don't you kick it off with Lili?
No, well, Lili, it's in the middle of a meeting right now.
Okay.
So yes, she's gonna connect with us at 11:15.
Okay.
But we're gonna start with Jerry. Now that you were mentioning that he's your dear friend, so I'm gonna give you the honor to introduce him.
Well, great. Jerry and I met in 1992. That's the first recollection I've had of Jerry. I was a nominee for the Republican Texas House of Representatives. Back in those days, it was House District 132, which has now changed. And Jerry was, believe, the nominee for a state Senate position. And that's how far back we go. I think it's 29 years, coming up on 30 years, Jerry. So it's great to have you on the program. Can you hear us?
I got you loud and clear.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for taking the time. Jerry, let's just jump right into it. You've written some very interesting op-eds or articles about the contributions. You've also contributed to various documentaries in the state of Texas. What has been your interest about the Texas Revolution, Tejanos, the Mexican Americans, the long multi-generational Hispanics in the state of Texas? Why all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, but what has sparked this interest in you?
Well, I mean, for too long, we taught Texas history wrong. I mean, for 100 years, it was Anglo good, Tejano, Mexicano bad. But about 40 or 50 years ago, we began to wake up, I guess. And leaders in that effort, by the way, were the Daughters of the Republic of Texas when they started changing the narrative at the Alamo. The fact that Tejanos who died at the Alamo, and out of 200, well, that's only 7. But when you look at the population of Texas at that time, Anglos outnumbered Tejanos by at least a factor of 10 to 1. So that was a significant contribution. You also take into consideration Lorenzo de Zavala, Juan Seguin, and all those other patriots of 1836 who were Tejanos or Mexicanos. And then, so we started changing the narrative, and it was long overdue. But then along came in the last 2 or 3 years, people who have decided that 1836 was all about slavery, had nothing to do with liberty, and that's completely bogus. And I would encourage people to go to my website, 1836 Truth, 1836truth.com. And it will lay out the causes of the rebellion. It'll point out certain interesting facts for those who say it was all about slavery, but when you consider that Texas was but one state in rebellion during that time, there were at least 7 others, and by some measures, 12 others, Mexican states in rebellion. None of those Mexican states were slave states. So was it just they jumped on the wagon to help Texas? I don't think so. So there's all kinds of errors in the woke movement to rewrite Texas history in a manner that's equally as bad as it was incorrectly written, 50 or 60 years ago. So my mission is to try to correct that, and it's not an easy battle.
Well, God bless you, because there's so much of Texas history that is, in my opinion, incorrect and being fed to our children. And in fact, I love when the woke society, tries to rewrite history or rename certain segments of our community. It's backfired on them in the past. I think it's going to continue to backfire, because I don't know if you heard the top of the show, Jerry, but we've just concluded a major poll in Texas. And one of the questions we asked, an open-ended question in a poll, which is rather expensive to do, and then we codified all of the answers. But when we asked Latino registered voters in Texas how they identified themselves ethnically or by nationality to their friends and family, the overwhelming majority said they were Americans. And then the second highest category was Texans. And so Hispanics and Mexican Americans and Tejanos want to be part and parcel of this society. And for a long time, even as you know, Texas, through the State Board of Education, in my opinion, hasn't told the real story, because, as they're signers to the Texas Declaration of Independence, which were Mexican American, Texans, Tejanos, whatever. But back to your point about slavery, I think Sam Houston was opposed to slavery, and he was one of the guys leading the rebellion. Tell us a little bit about it.
Sam Houston was opposed to secession, and he owned slaves. I think he owned 3 slaves, which were freed maybe prior to his death or immediately upon the death of his will. But we try to paint all the Anglos with this monolithic brush. And let's look at the people who fought and died at the Alamo. Among those was a Dr. Amos Pollard. Amos Pollard was from Massachusetts, and he was a published abolitionist who died fighting at the Alamo. So if he was fighting for slavery, he had a momentary lapse, I guess, at that point in time. If you look at the Texas Declaration of Independence, there are 20 reasons listed, 6 general reasons and 14 specific reasons. Not one of them even mentions slavery or involuntary servitude. So if slavery was a cause, I suggest to you that it couldn't be higher than number 21. And if you look at as I think I mentioned, the number of states that rebelled at the same time, the only difference is Texas was successful in the rebellion, Actually, you could say Yucatan was successful also because they were essentially an independent nation up until 1846 when they made up with Mexico. But the rebellion was essentially for the same reason all the states. It was Santa Anna's abrogation of the Constitution of 1824. It was the enactment of 7 laws, siete leyes, which dissolved all the legislatures, removed all the elected governors and replaced them with appointed governors, and basically centralized all control in Mexico City. This was not well received across Texas, and many states rebelled, including Nuevo California, Tamaulipas, let's see, Zacatecas, Tabasco, Coahuila, Nuevo Leon, Yucatan. They all rebelled and took up arms in many cases. And so the story we are being force fed now is without merit.
Well, Jerry, I'm going to read to you breaking news that we got just recently this morning. And it says the Texas Education Board moves to delay updates to social studies curriculum after conservatives push back. After facing pressure from conservatives over proposed updates to the state's social studies curriculum scheduled for this year, the State Board of Education today took a step to delay the revision until 2025.
Yeah, a lot of controversy was generated in a very short period of time. And I think what got folks riled up about that was, you learn Texas history, the curricula is in 4th grade and 7th grade. That was going to be replaced with a piecemeal over time in every grade inclusion of Texas history. But I think, and I may be wrong, but I think it would have eliminated the mandatory 4th and 7th grade Texas history curricula. And then and I'm just reading it myself this morning, there was some mention in one of the guides, one of the posts that talked about what caused the Texas Revolution and mentioned slavery as one of the choices. Slavery, it's not that Texans at that time were opposed to slavery. It's not that the folks who write the Texas Constitution, at the same time they wrote the Independence, were not. I mean, clearly the Constitution was a pro-slavery document, but it's that that was not a cause that was in play at that time. Mexico had made no significant effort to eliminate slavery. There was one brief attempt which didn't apply to Texas. I think that was in 1830. And interestingly enough, it also exempted the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, which is down somewhere in South Mexico. So Mexico, in that declaration, excluded Texas and also a part of Mexico from it. So it's not that they weren't pro-slavery, it's that it was not a cause of rebellion. The cause of rebellion was the centralization of the government, the siete leyes, and the abrogation of the Constitution. That's what caused the rebellion.
Well, and it's exactly what's going on today in Texas. There's a rebellion against the Democratic Party because, Tejanos, Mexican Americans, as us immigrants, whether we're from Colombia, from Cuba, from Venezuela, from Nicaragua, we all want freedom. We want to set the course of our own future, Jerry. And this woke left that's trying to indoctrinate our children isn't working in Texas. It's not going to work, in Texas. Texas is called the Lone Star State. We set our own course, and Tejanos and Hispanics in Texas want to set our own course. And we just thank you for the interest that you've taken in Texas history. We want to ask you back because there's so much other issues that we want to discuss. I shared with you that we passed a resolution last legislative session honoring Tejanos in Texas every April. And so I'm glad you got to read the resolution, and hopefully you'll join us perhaps in Dallas next year when we do our 4th annual Tough Tejano Award. We'd like to have you as up on the dais talking about Texas history. So please tell us.
I'd love to do that. I've joined one of your Tough Tejano events, at least one of them.
Yes, you did when you were running for the position against George P. Bush. So anyway, good, Jerry. Well, thank you. God bless, and keep up the good work.
I'm with you. Count me
buddy.
in.
Jerry, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, you were saying, Mexican Americans, how they feel about their background and living in Texas, they feel Tejanos. Well, I am no Mexican American, I am Colombiana. And when I moved to this state, I felt like I'm not only a part of, I'm a U.S. citizen, but I am Tejana. I love this state. I love Houston. I started my career in Laredo, Texas, and I love the border and I love the people in this state.
I've even seen you at a rodeo.
Oh, a lot. I never miss rodeo since I came to Houston. I love rodeo. I love to wear my boots. And, I feel Tejana.
Well, that's the beauty of America is that everybody wants to come here to be an American. And the left and the Democrats continue to separate us and pull us apart and tear our country apart. And we immigrants aren't putting up with it. And certainly not Hispanics in Texas and not Tejanos and not the multi generational Mexican American community. Thank God that it's a rising community, growing community that is starting to exercise their vote and they're voting the right way. We always say TLC, Texas Latino Conservatives. We never tell you what party to vote for. We simply tell you to vote your values. And we know that Latinos in Texas are conservative. So who do you have up next?
Well, I have another Latina in Texas that she recently moved from New York to Dallas.
She probably hadn't been to a rodeo yet.
Well, maybe she's been, I don't know, but she's also Colombiana. She's from Colombia. She moved to this country when she was 17 years old. And her story is like she came here without speaking English, like me. I came here when I was 25 without speaking English, and I still struggling with the English.
We know.
As we know.
We know.
But her story is amazing, and now she is a former corporate executive turned entrepreneur and independence board director. She is an award-winning, and she is a CEO of a cultural intelligence and market research from Culture Intech, and she is the CEO of CIEN Plus. So she is Lili Gil Valletta, colombiana. Un súper honor, la conocí la conocí aquí en Houston, luego fui a verla a Nueva York en una de sus presentaciones en el edificio de Google y hoy nos regala un poquito de su tiempo, que es súper, súper ocupada, para estar con nosotros aquí en TLC Live. Lili, bienvenida, qué honor tenerte no solamente en TLC, pero también en Dallas y aquí en Texas.
Thank you, gracias a todos por tenerme.
Well, Lili, tell us a little bit of your background. We want to learn about you because we've been seeing you all over the place. We're seeing you as a commentator in Fox, in CNN, everywhere. But tell us a little bit your background as an immigrant Colombiana, that you came here when you were 17 years old, and then you went one of the executives in Johnson & Johnson, and now you have your own company and you're making a big impact around the country.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you everyone for having me. And I think my story is like that of many that are probably listening now. The American dream is real, and as you said, I came very young. I couldn't speak the language, and I thought I was coming just to do an ESL program. And here I am. I ended up doing my undergrad, MBA, master's programs and all that here in the States, in this great nation. But I think in a nutshell, so I don't go too much into the whole long part of my story, I discovered very early on that there was power in cultural intelligence. And I've actually trademarked that term, and my firm is known as a cultural intelligence company, helping big corporations and corporate leaders realize that the power in numbers that the cultural shifts of America are showing us actually have a business and competitive advantage for us all. I know a lot of people talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion these days. I don't want to diminish the importance of being inclusive, but when we elevate the conversation into the numbers, that is our sweet spot. So we work with many, many big brands and corporations. Some of them are Texas-based, proudly, like the PepsiCos of the world, but Google, Prudential, Merck, Pfizer, J&J are clients of ours. And I love having these conversations where we can talk about really the numbers and what it means for our community to be the fastest growing electoral, segment, consumer segment, children segment. Everywhere you look, we keep driving all the growth. More than half of the growth of American population comes from us. So that is me, and my whole family's in Colombia because I came here with a suitcase and a student visa in my hand. And anyone that tells me you can't, si se puede, yes, si se puede, because this country is an amazing place of opportunity when you have the resilience and discipline to stay focused and chase what you're looking for in your career, life, job, etc. So that's a little bit of me. So thank you.
Lili, do you believe the cultural changes that you're seeing in the fastest growing demographics in the United States also transfer politically? In other words, in your opinion, do the shifts occur in the way that the Latino, immigrant, Hispanic community vote in this country?
Well, first of all, the sheer numbers are something that anyone on any side of the aisle, political aisle, need to pay attention to, right? So we are about 32 million eligible voters. So in terms of critical mass, is a huge, huge number. There was this myth of turnout that I think we demystified during the last round of elections because Latinos are showing up. And as the fastest growing segment of electorates for the last 20 years, you cannot win without the Hispanic vote. I know we're having a Texas conversation. This is my home now, where anywhere between 3 to 5 voters or eligible voters happens to be Hispanic. That's huge. But when you look at the map, the electoral map, we happen to be concentrated in a lot of those states that are critical winning states for the electoral map to work. Places like Colorado, where a lot of people think like, what do you mean Colorado? You think Breckenridge and like non-Hispanics, skiing. Well, guess what? We are a very big group, almost 20% of voters in Colorado. And the math kind of goes on and on. So absolutely, there is the sheer numbers and there is the mindset. A mindset of entrepreneurship, a mindset of upward mobility. Our kids are enrolling in colleges at a higher pace than Black and non-Hispanic white kids. And a lot of people don't even report that number because it's the unknown side of this Latino prosperity that we're seeing driving new business creation faster than any other segment, enrolling and getting educated in colleges at a faster rate, and we are the fastest affluent segment. So all of that combined calls for a new filter for making policy and political decisions that obviously are all about protecting that land of opportunity that we came here for to begin with.
Not to get too political, but let me just say that I think one of the mistakes that is being made by policymakers and political parties is that they see the Latino community as a monolithic society, and we're not. Is that something that you've encountered when you advise corporate America? In other words, they think all Hispanics, like from Texas, they think all Hispanics are Mexicans, right? So they don't realize we have Guatemaltecos, Nicaragüenses, Argentinos, Peruanos, I mean, Spaniards. They have very little understanding of the Hispanic culture. I say to people all the time, because people ask me, Lili, what are Hispanics? And you know what my rhetorical answer is? What are Americans? Because Americans come from every stripe, right? We have Filipinos,
right.
We have Japanese, we have Chinese, we have Saudi Arabians, we have Persians, we have Europeans that are Americans. Same thing with the Hispanic world. We have people that are of descendants of Africa, right? If you come from Colombia and Cuba and Venezuela, we have a huge African population. Our music reflects that, and so does our other cultural activities.
That's right.
But I have friends from Nicaragua who are of Asian descent. We have mestizos. We have, the indigenous community. So I tell people all the time, the Hispanic world is like America. We're diverse.
That is exactly right. And I think, again, as a Colombiana now that lives in Texas, where I am the minority here, if I was in South Florida, there's many more Colombianos, right? It's really interesting. And I see it as an opportunity when people ask me and are puzzled by the fact that I don't like spicy food. And it's like, no, I don't, because I am Colombian. And it's part of that monolith assumption, right? We are definitely, and here's an easy answer too, Hispanics, Latinos in America we are not a race, we are a culture. Yeah. And a culture that is like a big sancocho, right, of everything, right, as you were describing. But what's beautiful about it, despite our difference right If you're in the Northeast, it's highly Puerto Rican and Dominican. If you're in South Florida, it's Cuban, Colombian, Venezuelan. There's a lot of Puerto Ricans in Central Florida that after Maria immigrated and really kind of make that their home. And obviously, when you look from the middle to the west of the country, is primarily Mexican American. So it's not a one size fits all. However, because we're not a race but a culture, there are some unifying values that, despite of country of origin, makes us a beautiful culture, which is a lot of it anchored on faith, on family. And family, by the way, is not just your bloodline, but family. We make family the third cousins that you only see once a year, but still are part of a 200 people family get together. That is family. And then you have also the prosperity or freedom or opportunity. And it's, if you anchor any message, by the way, whether you're a corporation, a brand, a political, figure on the right, on the left, in the middle, whatever, don't ignore that we are moved by those values. And despite the Puerto Rican, Cuban, Colombian, Mexican nuance, there is that really binds us together. However, let me say this very humbly, because now I'm in Texas, which is Mexican American world. When you look at all of the 62 million Hispanics in this country, which, by the way, it's a huge number. A lot of people don't realize that there's more Latinos in the US than Canadians in all of Canada. It's like a huge number. We roughly 70% of all those 62 million are Mexican Americans or Latinos of Mexican descent. So definitely there is a priority in that size and cohort. However, it's a geographic distribution that everyone that, again, is working on strategies, on policy, on messaging need to understand, because it's certainly not a one size fits all.
Yep, and that's the reason we exist. I mean, that's the entire reason we started Texas Latino Conservatives, because I don't know, Lili, but I got into politics in 1992, and there was very little effort, at least from my party, because I'm a conservative. I've been a Republican for many, many years. But I saw that the Republicans were not messaging the Latino community adequately, so we created Texas Latino Conservatives to talk about those values. And what's really encouraging to me is that you said we're an interesting and beautiful culture, but we share this, similar values. And it's those values that I continue to say are going to keep Texas and this country in great shape for the foreseeable future, for my children and my grandchildren. I'm sure Andre has a question.
I want you to, because Lili was in the middle of a meeting at the beginning of the show when you were talking about the poll the TLC conduct. So I wanted you to tell Lili about the poll that we just have the results, because I want her to comment the impact of the Latino vote in 2022 and 2024, but also the switch or the swing from the Latinos to the conservative side.
Yeah, so everybody's really interested about what happened down in South Texas, Lili, because, we've switched a lot of counties that have historically voted Democrat to now voting conservative and for Republican candidates. For example, in Maverick County, which borders, I think, the state of Coahuila, next to this Valverde County, had never had Republicans running the primary. We now have 8 Republicans running there. In Starr County, we actually flipped that to Republican. Down in the Rio Grande Valley, we elected a Mexican-born young lady who came here as a farm worker, Mayra Flores, which was a graduate of our Leadership Latino Institute, to the United States Congress. That's never happened. So everybody's trying to figure out, why is that? Well, we dove deeply into the registered voter mentality in Texas in a poll that we conducted of 1,200 registered voters in certain regions of Texas. And what we discovered was absolutely fascinating. Number one, when we asked them what, 61% of them said they did not like some aspect of the Democratic Party. I know you don't want to get partisan, but this is our poll that we're sharing with you. And when we asked them that 61%, what is it about the Democratic Party you don't like? The first answer, the highest percentage received, was they're the party of handouts. In Spanish, it says, son el partido de los vagos. And so it was clear to us that, that fits, because Hispanics are very entrepreneurial. We come here to work. We don't come here to, as you said, work a corner and look for a handout, right? We want to
Yeah.
set our own course. We're very entrepreneurial by nature, and we don't like to pay taxes to people that sit around and don't work. So we also asked them how they identify themselves to their family and friends. Most of them said as Americans or Texans. We also asked a very fascinating question about the oil and gas industry, and you just hit the nail on the head, because messaging is not only important in corporate America, but also, and keenly more so, in politics. And,
Right.
one of the mistakes that I think that this current administration has made attacking the oil and gas industry, Latinos by a margin of 60% support oil and gas industry in Texas. So fascinating results. We're happy to share those with you, so you'll learn
Yes.
a little more about how Texans feel in terms of politics. But it's a very interesting poll.
I love numbers, and definitely that is the voice of the people, kind of giving us a peek into how those shifts happen. You're absolutely right. So many of the strategists and the political masterminds are still to this day trying to figure out how is it possible that, first of all, Trump won 32%, depending on what you look, 32, 38% of the Latino vote nationally, which is up a whole more than 10 points from the prior year, and 41% of the Latino vote in Texas, give or take, with a lot of those switch that happened, which is also up from 34% in the previous year. So those are huge numbers. And I don't think again, I keep telling people, get out of the personality. There's a lot of sensationalism, obviously, with the big, personality of President Trump or a candidate, but it's policies. And people, especially our people, and of any background, really, I think it's at this point, after 2 years of pandemic and lockdowns and economic distress, people will be voting with the kitchen table issues that are impacting their kids, their families, the educational curriculums of the schools that their kids are going to, their ability to work, because our Latinos, and you look at the Department of Labor data, we over index or are overrepresented in the very industries that have been hit the most during COVID, whether it was construction, hospitality, restaurants, oil and gas for our state here. Then it just doesn't make sense to continue to support anyone that would even hint at impacting or hindering those very industries and jobs that are so near and dear to us as a community. I always say, and this is a fun exercise, especially with my non-Hispanic friends, I throw this out. I say, well, tell me, when was the last time that you saw a Latino begging in the streets?
Yeah.
If we are begging, which I don't like that word, if we're asking, it's probably for a job at a Home Depot, but that's not begging. That's looking for work. And that in itself, and that mindset, is definitely carrying in through in decisions. I think I've had the great opportunity of talking one-on-one with Congresswoman Mayra Flores, and I love how, just in many ways, non-political she is. She says, it's common sense. And if it's people are not, a lot of the people in the, Rio Grande Valley, or you mentioned Starr County, those switches, was because for the very first time, somebody talked to them about conservative policies and values. So it wasn't like we Latinos all of a sudden schizophrenia hit and we switch our views. It wasn't a bipolar moment. It's messaging, right? And we don't say anything, whether it is the right or the left. Those that have the megaphone and actually hand out a hand to say, hello, nice to meet you, this is who I am, will have the upper hand, because then you're introducing what you stand for and who you are. And Mayra was telling me that she met so many people in the canvassing, door-to-door work that her team and she did personally in the Rio Grande Valley, people that had never in their life met a quote-unquote Republican. And so it's a lot of it is outreach. So it's the work. We cannot just assume, because that has been the mistake in many cases of the Democratic, side of the House, that have assumed. Same thing with GOP and Republicans. They cannot assume. We cannot be taken for granted. Invest, have the right policies that are common sense, and do the messaging in culture, in context, and in language so people get to know what you stand for. And then you see what just happened in a lot of those counties that you mentioned that have surprised the world.
Well, you're exactly correct. And in fact, it's interesting you say that because we have just, in the last few days, been receiving the final edits of a whole series of political commercials that we'll be doing across the state of Texas. And I tell Andrea, and I kid with my conservative friends, but, no party, no political party, as you said, either side of the aisle can take the Hispanic Latino vote for granted. You're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to talk to us about policies and what helps us and our future, which is our children. And I've always said, the Republicans can be pretty darn good about snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. So, not only are we trying to, encourage Hispanics to vote their values and vote in the political process, but a lot of our effort, and Andrea knows this, we spend educating conservatives in the Republican Party in the state of Texas on how to address us and how to reach Latinos. Yeah. And this is what makes our organization absolutely fascinating is the work is endless. And as you said, I don't think, as maybe perhaps corporate America, the political parties don't realize you've got to invest.
You have to. You must. I mean, how could you not when 40% of Texans happen to be Hispanic? And it's not just about the today. And yeah, I get it. You got to win elections and you focus on that season. Same thing as when brands are wanting to move products and sales, etc. But you have to earn your way to even engage in the dialogue to begin with. And that comes with consistency. Like any good human relationship, you have to keep showing up and being relevant. And I just don't understand, again, nothing against, let's say, the powers that being of the GOP in Texas, for example. But at the very least, 40% of your entire statewide budget should be allocated to Hispanics because we are 41% of the population. So you can either want to win or not. And it's putting the money where growth is and opportunity is. And guess what? That was one of those kind of mystery items in the last round of elections because neither party, nor President Biden or President Trump's team really, really invested heavily during the 2016 elections, or I mean, the 2020 elections, I mean. Imagine if they would have. Yeah. However, that big victory in South Florida had to do with, it was hilarious because people, again, even my colleagues at Fox News didn't even report this because people will be like, what? For the longest time of that 2020 race, President Trump was outspending, sometimes at a rate as high as 3-1. It got at some point 5-1, outspending Biden's campaign in Spanish language advertising in Florida. But there was like none of that in Texas. I think they thought we weren't gonna like switch the way it happened. It's fascinating. So yes, it takes money and the proper messaging because you don't win your way just with advertising. And the combination of both could be quite powerful.
Yeah, I was just, one of the things, and I'm going to let Andrea jump in here, but one of the things I've noticed, Lili, for example, when you say spending resources in the community that has significant needs, because that's what public policy is. You decide how the tax dollars are going to be spent. But we have been trying to articulate that childhood obesity and type 2 diabetes in Texas is out of control, especially among Latinos. And it's shocking to me how hard we have to work to engage our policy professionals to invest in the health of the future of this state. It's just beyond me. But those are one of the things that we're trying to do, educate policymakers that they need to invest in our community because untreated type 2 diabetes has horrific results after a few years.
Yeah. And just on that, I know, Andrea, probably you're burning to ask a question, but I don't want to. Healthcare is my sweet spot. I come from J.
Yeah, I know. We know.
A lot of my clients are in healthcare. A lot of my clients are in the healthcare space. We have the great benefit and amazing fun job of working with GSK, Pfizer, J&J, the big pharmas. But it's interesting you mentioned diabetes, because I think that is where you graduate the conversation into, in that case, health economics. So diabetes is the most expensive chronic disease in our nation. In fact, $1 out of every 4 that the US healthcare cost or system spends in caring for people is related to diabetes. Now, if you look at, again, our demographics, and let's say, give or take, again, 40% of Texans happen to be Hispanic, we are more affected by diabetes at a rate of 3 to 4 times more. That means the rising cost of healthcare for the state or for the country, as a matter of fact, cannot be put under control unless you tackle that issue amongst the segment that is driving all the population growth and happens to be 3 to 4 times more likely to have diabetes. So it's a health economics policy discussion. It's not like we're going to hand out some free thing here and there, but it's tackling up front, because at the same time, the things in our food that are not so good for promoting or keeping diabetes under control are they don't get penalized for anything, right? And so there's a very smart conversation to be had that is at that higher level of policies that, by the way, are not Latino policies. If we take care of that diabetes issue, it will impact everyone's cost of healthcare with preventative care up front, instead of waiting for it to be too late and letting this get bigger and bigger, because we're the population that is getting bigger and bigger. So anyway, thank you for going that. I could go into a whole rabbit hole of healthcare if you take me there.
We will.
We will invite you again, maybe talking about just about health. But Lili, call to action before we go to our next guest. Tell us a little bit how in the political arena, not only the politicians that are running into any of the parties, but also us as our community, because people need to understand that everything that is impacting in our daily basis, it has to do with politics, and it has to do with who we choose to be in power.
Exactly. So I think the power begins with each and every one of us. I say this in many circles beyond politics. We wait for others to instigate the change, to make the move, to put in the money. But guess what? All of us have a circle of influence that we can exercise today. Whether it is your niece who's graduating from college, or your tia that doesn't really know much about politics and has never been, has never even registered or voted just because le da pereza, whatever it may be. So I think it starts with us influencing our circle of influence, pardon my redundancy, to get register and vote. Porque el que no vota no se puede quejar. So if you don't vote, then you can complain. Like, that is part of that power. So from then on, the next layer of kind of call to action I have is for those of you, which I'm assuming is a lot of the people that watch you, for those of you that support campaigns or are donors or know a candidate, it's to engage in common sense conversations, meaning don't get trapped into the whirlwind or the tornado of politics. I think we need to have conversations about policies, and that's different. And when you focus on policies and make informed decisions as a voter on policies, it just changes the energy and the filters that you put through how you evaluate people and choices, etc. But that needs to be an intentional thing. And last but not least, I think parties, Republican Party, Democratic Party, who really want to win, they have to invest and earn our vote. Convince me, tell me otherwise. Whomever has the best messaging and really the proper culturally relevant approach will and shall prevail, but it takes effort. It takes surrounding themselves with people like you, experts in this space that know what really matters. And then it becomes a winning formula. But again, we have become so big, so strong, so quickly, no one can win without the Hispanic vote. And I'll sit in front of any political strategist and look at the electoral math, demographics, growth, average age because we are on average 27 years old. The average, non-Hispanic is 47, 50. That means it's a long-term value of a customer, of a voter, of a fan, of that person, that Hispanic, Latino American that you want to engage now and for generations to come. So, but the change starts with each of you. El que no vota no se queja.
Thank you, Lili. We got to move over to Fort Bend County. We hope
Lili,
to have you back.
gracias.
Mil gracias. Es un placer conocerte. So, all right, let's go over to Fort Bend County and see what's happening over there in the county courts at law.
Judge Christopher Morales, County Court at Law Number 1, Fort Bend County, Texas, and he is seeking the re-election. Judge Morales, bienvenido. Welcome to TLC Live. And we've been having a very, very interesting show. You've been listening through the whole show. But we want to get to know you and why you're seeking the re-election and what we need to keep doing, working in Fort Bend County.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come on your show today. I will say this. I'm seeking re-election for one main reason. I care about my community. I care about public safety. I care about the law and ensuring that the law is followed. And then I care about fiscal responsibility within the courthouse. We need to make sure that the judges in the courthouse are running a tight ship, are following the law as it is written in the Constitution and the statutes in our state. Now, another reason I'm running, and this is kind of, everybody asks me that question all the time, is it's public service. Really, it comes down to that. My family instituted in me from a young age that I was going to give back to my community. I always heard from my father, you're going to give back to the community that gives so much to you. And so from a young age, they had me volunteering at multiple nonprofits, different organizations. From about age 5 on up to 18, I was always somewhere volunteering. So it was really instilled in me almost from birth that I was going to give back to my community. And I remember when I was a young prosecutor in the courtroom, I was looking around, I was looking for ways to get involved, and I quickly realized that the one person in the legal system who can truly impact their community more so than anyone else is the judge. The judge truly can impact the community in so many ways, especially here in Fort Bend County, because the county courts are general jurisdiction courts, meaning we handle all sorts of cases. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the cases we handle, if you don't mind. We handle criminal misdemeanor cases, which are DWIs, simple assaults, possession marijuana cases. We handle juvenile cases, which range anywhere from truancy all the way up to murder. We also handle civil cases with up to $250,000 in controversy. And typically that's your contract dispute, a small car accident case, or a debt collection case. We also handle civil mental health commitment cases. That means essentially that if you have a loved one who has a mental illness and they're a danger to themselves or others, you could have them involuntarily committed to a mental health hospital as long as they meet certain criteria. And it would be for a limited period of time, essentially. Additionally, we have condemnation jurisdiction. That means when the county or state wants to expand a road, they would need to file a suit to take the landowner's property. Now, they don't take it for free. They seek compensation. They're going to compensate that landowner for that property. And finally, I also have JP Court jurisdiction appeal. That essentially means if you didn't like your speeding ticket result, you can come to my court and appeal it up to me and we'll have another decision on it. And then also I have a specialty court, which is truly my passion. It's a misdemeanor mental health court. There we do so much good for individuals, offenders who have pre-existing mental illnesses. And if we've got some time, I'd love to really dig into that.
So, Judge Morales, I'm more interested now in your background and your family background, because one of the things I've discovered as we have traveled the entire state of Texas is the number of Hispanic conservatives in our state, from positions of county clerk, district clerk, county treasurer, commissioners, local sheriffs and local constables. But we're also finding a plethora of judges that are Hispanic, but very conservative in their approach. Well, I've always thought that we in the state of Texas need judges that enforce the statutes. Not that, we hear this all the time. People don't understand. Judges aren't supposed to make law. And that's true, right, Judge? You guys are supposed
That's absolutely correct.
You're supposed to take the statutes of the state of Texas, the criminal code, and apply them to the facts as presented in the case. You oversee the jury process. But so I'm delighted. I think you sound like you're very committed to that process. But more interesting to me is your background. Where did your family hail from? How long have you guys been in Texas? What made your family instill those values in you?
Yeah, well, I'm actually a fourth generation Texan. My family has been here in Texas for a very long time on my father's side of the family and my mother's side of the family as well. They've been here for generations. So I've been here for quite some time. I can't say that I'm a first generation American. I can't say I'm even a second generation, but my family has been in Texas for a very long time.
But where did they hail from?
Well, Spain, to be exact. My father's side of the family came from Spain. And so, we have that. I have a cultural, I relate to the Hispanic community very closely because in my family, faith and family are the two most important things. And as I've been listening to the conversations you've been having here with the other guests today, it's clear. And even my interactions with the Hispanic community, Latino community, family and faith are huge and very important. In fact, I'm a big believer in grassroots politics. Every weekend, I go out and I block walk the neighborhoods here in Fort Bend County. And I'm not sure if you're very familiar with the demographics of Fort Bend County, but we are a very diverse community. The Hispanic Latino community makes up roughly 25% of the population here in Fort Bend County. And so there's a large population of Hispanics and Latinos here. And so as I'm block walking the communities and knocking on doors and talking to Hispanic individuals, Latinos, it's very clear that they are ready for a change. They ask me one question a lot. What party are you affiliated with? And the second I say I'm a Republican, they immediately say, you have my vote. I think a lot of the topics you've touched on today with your other guests ring true with many Hispanics here in Fort Bend County. They don't want handouts. They don't want to be part of the party of handouts. They are sick and tired of some of the policies that are currently in place. And they're ready for a change. They're ready and they see themselves as conservatives, family, faith. They care about the law. They care about ensuring that judges are following the law, not creating the law. When I took office back in 2015, I swore an oath that I would follow the law of this state and this nation. And I have done so since I've been judge of County Court of Law number 1. I've made sure that every ruling that I make is applied appropriately and accordingly to statute and case law. Nothing else.
Josh Morales, something that got my attention, the juvenile part of your court or your jurisdiction. We've been seeing a lot. I mean, I'm a mother of twins, or 17 years old, and we've been seeing lately all over the news every single day the teenagers committing crimes, the teenagers with firearms, with teenagers stealing, fighting, creating problems. I mean, what is going on? And besides you being in the bench, what do you plan to help those teens or to help the families? Because everything comes from the home, from the family values. So I think we're losing values because we're seeing all of these things happening with our kids.
Yeah, so when I first ran in 2014, I ran on the promise that I'm going to ensure that the juveniles got the resources they needed to become productive, thriving young adults. And I think that rings true with what I have done since I took the bench in 2015. I have made sure that every juvenile that comes through my court gets a diploma or a GED. In fact, I helped start the first GED graduation ceremony with the Fort Bend County Juvenile Probation Department. I wanted those kids who weren't appropriate for a diploma, but got their GED. I wanted them to have the same pomp and circumstance that anybody who gets a diploma has. So we put on a program every year, and I MC the event every single year, where we put on a true graduation ceremony for these kids that are getting their GED. And like I tell these kids who come through my court and making sure that they get their education, an education is something nobody can take away from you. Nobody. It is something that you can carry with you for the rest of your life. No matter if you lose a job, if you lose freedoms, it doesn't matter. You will always have that education to fall back on at some point. So an education is first, and it's key. It's the first and foremost thing that we need to make sure all kids get who come through the system. Secondly, we've got to find ways to connect resources with these kids. And that's some things that I'm doing in my court. You got to make sure if they have a drug addiction, they're getting the treatment they need. Right now we are seeing a large part of the juvenile population who are addicted to drugs. Drugs are running rampant in our community, and we have to find ways to fix that. I think a lot of that goes back to public safety, ensuring that the bail laws and the judges are properly following the law and enforcing the law. But we also those who are addicted, we've got to treat them. We've got to get them the treatment they need so they can go on to live a full, productive, and thriving life. But in addition to that, there's other issues that come into play as well. Mental illness is on the rise, whether it's in the juvenile population or whether it's in the adult population. We are finding that mental illness has skyrocketed in the past 5 years, or at least we're identifying it more than we did in the past. We have many resources available to the kids in the juvenile system, but we also have resources available to adults as well. In fact, I kind of touched on this briefly earlier. I have a misdemeanor mental health court. The court is designed to reduce recidivism rates among the adult offenders and reduce the cost of the county jail as well. Essentially, what that means is we're trying to prevent them from becoming repeat offenders. I always like to say, I'm trying to stop the front door to the county jail from becoming a revolving door with these individuals. Many times you'll find, and this goes back to statistics, if you look at mentally ill offenders versus non-mentally ill offenders, the mentally ill offender is much more likely to repeat or to reoffend than the non-mentally ill offender. So what we need to do is get them the resources they need. So my misdemeanor mental health court, I look at it as a resource hub for these individuals. They may not know where to look, but I do. So I may connect them with the VA if they're a veteran. I may connect them with Texana Mental Health Services, doctors, housing, transportation, all of these services that are pre-existing in our community and in our state and in our nation. And I find ways to connect them to those resources. One example that I'd love to share with you.
Well, Judge, I hate to interrupt you, but we're running out of time. So let's, I know you've got a lot on your plate. You've got a lot going on, but let us know, how can we help you? In other words, if somebody wants to help your campaign, where do they go?
Well, they would go to www.judgemorales.com. And if you'd sign up on the link there at the bottom where you could volunteer your time. Like I said, we're out block walking every single weekend. And the more volunteers I get out each weekend, the more people I can reach in the community. It's key that we reach as many people as possible, because at the end of the day, it comes down to votes. And that comes to the second part of how you can help. You can vote. I need people to get out and vote this November. Too many times, the Latino conservatives, the Republicans, they sit at home during the midterms because, we're red, we're okay, I don't have to worry about it. We're going to have a conservative elected officials. Well, here in Fort Bend County, we've seen that that's not the case. In the past, we've had some non-conservatives elected to office. And so I need every voter to get out this November and cast their ballot.
Well, good.
So those
And
are two major ways you can help.
Good. Well, we plan to help you, and I know that you have a great party leader there, and Bobby Eberly, who's going to do a fabulous job this year. We're looking for great things out of Fort Bend County. Judge, we want to thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you back. Godspeed.
Judge Morales, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, October, it's people need to register because October 11 is the last day to register to vote, and then November 8 is the elections day.
I love how you're always on top of that. I can't remember those dates, so thank you for reminding everybody that you have to register 30 days prior to Election Day to be eligible to vote. So make sure that you go out and register to vote. If you're in Harris County, you register with the Tax Assessor Collector's Office. You can go to the Secretary of State's website and just click on voter registration. I think every social media outlet now will send you a voter registration depending on your, address that you put in. It's very easy to register to vote. Do it. It's important. I know everybody says, why should I? Politicians are crooked. That never changes. Yes, it does. Let me just give you an example how it changes. Harris County prior to 2018 had one of the lowest crime rates in Texas. And when we had the switch from Republican judges to Democrat judges, what happened, Andrea? What happened to the crime rate?
We are number one.
We're number one in crime.
Yeah.
So elections do have consequences. Register and vote. I'm out of here. We'll see you next week. Andrea, bid everybody a goodbye.
Nos vemos el próximo miércoles and click on TexasLatinoConservatives.com. Nos vemos. Chao, chao.